Hey everyone, welcome to another screenwriting video. My name is Tony D and this is little Joan of Arc who got a haircut. And today we're doing a screenwriter's take, and I'm talking about the movie Polar, which is currently playing on Netflix. Okay, so what is Polar? Polar is based on a webcomic by the same name. I believe the website is like polarcomic.com, something like that. It is a web comic that was reprinted by Dark Horse and then developed by Dark Horse Entertainment. And it's about a hitman who, well, you know the story. It's one of these subgenres, right? Where there's a hitman who's kind of got a heart of gold, and he kind of regrets his lifestyle choice, and he becomes a good guy, and we all root for him as he just kills tons of people. So it's the same kind of story like John Wick, or I mean, you've heard this story a million times now. It's a device that people have used for a while. You know, it's not a bad plot because it instantly gives you a protagonist who's very good at killing. The challenge really is to make him likable. And if I'm looking a little run down, I got a bit of a cold. And I already shot this video once and I messed it up, so I'm trying to do it again. Anyhow, so Polar is about a hitman named Duncan. He works for an organization called Damocles, which is I guess it's a private place where you hire hitmen. And Damocles has a rule that when you turn 50, if you're a hitman, you have to retire, and they have a pension plan. The problem is the owner of Damocles, Mr. Blute, is trying to sell it, and because he has too many retired hitmen, they have a liability in the millions for all the pensions they have to pay out. So the plot of the movie is Blute decides to kill all the hitmen they owe money to using the current hitmen. Now there's a few holes in that plot, which I immediately thought. The first hole is the most obvious. If you run an organization of hitmen and you use the young hitmen to kill the retired hitmen, the young hitmen are going to wonder, well, wait a minute, is he going to kill me when I get older and retire? So that's one plot point, which is a bit of a problem. Now, since, of course, Blute is selling the company, maybe not. But if you're that dishonest, I think the premise of that business and that whole idea of hitmen is once you screw them over, you're basically unleashing these guys with lots of killing skills. So it's an issue, but I overlooked it. People said the movie was good. It's based after a webcomic, and it is very entertaining. The way they make Duncan sympathetic, and many spoilers ahead, Duncan has basically PTSD. He is haunted by one of his hits that went wrong, and he ended up killing a kid and a mom. Later in the movie, he says he got bad intel or whatever, and that turns out to be a very important plot point later in the movie. So that makes him sympathetic. He seems to be a nice guy. He doesn't revel in the killing. Like a lot of these characters, he sort of regrets his lifestyle, but is at the same time kind of trapped in it. But he is getting out, and he's not going to be a hitman anymore. So that part of it is like, well, he's trying to be a good guy. One of the things that undermines the movie in the first act is the opening scene, because the hitman squad goes to kill the first retired, or not the first, but one of the retired agents of Damocles. And the problem is that agent is played by Johnny Knoxville, who in my view is not intimidating enough to play a retired hitman. I just didn't believe Johnny. I mean, I love Johnny. I love Jackass. I just didn't buy him as a retired hitman. I just couldn't see it. He seemed too crazy and weird. I mean, it was kind of a funny scene, but I think it undermined the rest of the film a little bit. So that first act, I was like, oh, is this going to be a comedy? And then it's kind of not quite a comedy. I mean, it is funny. I think they could have stepped on the gas on the comedy a little more. Now, maybe that's not true to the webcomic. I didn't read the webcomic. It seems more film noir, kind of Sin City-esque. But I think as a movie, the challenge is to make it, less of that webcomic. And since I've scripted a lot of webcomics, I get why the movie sort of plays out like it does. Rather than building and building and building, the movie kind of has little builds all the way through. So one of the things that carries you through is they often flash back to Duncan's previous hits, and that's action-oriented. There's a scene where he teaches this is in the second act, where he teaches a bunch of little kids a class. Ostensibly, it's supposed to be a class about, speaking other languages and going to other countries. It ends up being a class about being a hitman, it's a little weird. But during that scene, it's fun because they go back and in flashback and show you some of Duncan's hits. And his cover story is that he is a funeral guy for Americans who die overseas. So that's sort of his cover story. So the kids ask him, about how people die in other countries, and really he's reliving his murders in his head, which is a clever way to do it. It was entertaining, but the first two acts, I can't help but think, are a little weak because they rely so heavily on these wacky hitman characters, and they're not quite funny enough. I think they were close to being funny. I don't know, maybe it feels like the movie scaled back, or they wanted to be true to the webcomic, and maybe the webcomic wasn't as funny. I liked one of the characters. She wasn't a hitman, but she was in their crew. Her name was Junkie Jane, which was cool. It was very comic booky. I wanted to see the other characters kind of have those names and deals. I wanted to see, little weird quirks with them. They're kind of there, but they're not as prominent as I think they should have been. I would have liked to have seen that heightened a bit. Cindy, Sindy, is also another character. She's the bait of the hitman squad, and she's super hot and has sex with the guys, and while they're having sex, the hitman squad assassinates them. So that was a fun character. But once she gets it, and the other hitman characters, they weren't as much fun to me. But I understand why it was paced that way. It definitely feels like a webcomic to me. And that doesn't mean the first two acts aren't fun to watch. They are. They're just, the pacing feels weird. It doesn't feel like it builds quite enough. But then the third act hits. And the great thing about the third act is it really has some surprises in the kind of movie this is. So the one non-surprise, but it's a fun scene, is when Duncan finally goes nuts and, big spoilers ahead, by the way, and finally breaks free of Blut, and he has to save the neighbor woman he's sort of fallen for. That's a great scene because it's just super action oriented, and it's very gritty and bloody. There's a lot of bloody scenes. If you're squeamish, don't go see it. And then he gets ready. And right before that, before he's captured and tortured and breaks out, there's some good scenes where Richard Dreyfuss plays one of the dying but retired hitmen who betrays him, and that's a great scene because that was unexpected. It felt very much like Dreyfuss was not a character that was going to betray him, and yet he does. And on some level, it made sense. On another level, it was weird because Blut's killing all the retired guys, so he doesn't have to pay them. But I guess Dreyfuss's character already got paid, so they're overlooking that, I guess, because Dreyfuss is kind of really old maybe too old to be bothered with at this point. Maybe he's already been paid out. Wasn't quite explained, but still, it was a surprising scene. And then, you know, the scenes at the end become surprising because they have that great, you know, Duncan fights his way out, and then he gets in the Blute's castle, and the fear that emanates from him is so great. All the Blute's guys just abandon ship, which is a fun scene because you don't see it coming. You're expecting another just bloodbath, and it's just not. He just he just walks right through the mansion, and then the big twist at the end, which again you should see this movie. There's another twist on top of that. I kept checking the time, going, "Is this movie over? It feels a little short." No, no. There's like a part 2 of Act 3, and the part 2 of Act 3 is the big twist, which I didn't really see coming. There was really no way to see it. The filmmakers craft the movie in such a way that you're really not going to see it coming. There is one character who's added in, I guess, the end of the second or beginning of the third act. She comes in late, and again, that felt more like a webcomic. It didn't work for a movie. They really needed to mention her, and I didn't see her in any of the flashbacks, so I think that was one mistake on the filmmaker's part, besides the fact that the hitman character weren't as funny. But still, I really like the movie. I mean, the third act really redeems the whole thing. It looks like it's going to be a franchise. You may watch it and get tired, but I'm telling you, hang in there for the third act. I think it's worth it if you like bloody, actiony fun. I do. I mean, some of the parts were almost a little too gory for me, but most of it was really good, and I really... Matt Lucas, who plays Blute, is just... You just want him dead by the end of that movie. Really, really great performance by him. And also Mads Mikkelsen, who was the star of Young Hannibal. The Young Hannibal... What was it called? I think it was just called Hannibal, but he plays Hannibal Lecter in a TV series before Hannibal, was in Silence of the Lambs. And he is perfect for the role because he feels grizzled, war-torn, just messed up. If only they had gotten someone other than Johnny Knoxville for that first role. They needed someone not quite as grizzled as Mads Mikkelsen, but someone who at least could pass as a hitman. I just didn't believe Johnny in that role. I mean, maybe like a big giant. It would have been great to have Johnny in the Hitman Squad, because the rule is you retire at 50, and I'm sure Johnny is close enough to 50 to play 50, but he doesn't look 50. He could have played like a younger guy. I think he would have gotten away with it. And it just would have been fun to see him laughing as he was trying to kill people and then eventually failing to kill Mads Mikkelsen. I think he would have been better in that role. And then one of the goons, probably the big goon, I don't know the actor's name, but he's a huge guy. He, to me, would have been the perfect guy to assassinate because he was just monstrous. And that, to me, would have instantly given him that credibility in the opening scene, like, oh yeah, this guy was a hitman. Look at him, he's a giant. So I don't know what went wrong there. Maybe Johnny was very expensive and they could only use him for that opening. I don't know. I think that was a mistake. It kind of undermined the whole first act. But Matt Lucas, man, he's so evil and so over the top. The movie is a little bit comic booky too, in that sense, but I liked it. I gave it an 8 out of 10 on Frat Boy at the Movies, so I stand by that. It's playing on Netflix too, and so for me, a Netflix movie, the bar is lowered a little bit. You know, if I had paid, regular theater money to go see this, if I had paid, I don't know what a movie costs anymore, 12, 15 bucks. $20, depending on where you go, I probably would have given it a lower rating. But for a Netflix original, I'm already paying for Netflix, so it's totally worth watching. So put Polar on your pull list. And you know, it's an interesting way to script. I wouldn't recommend it simply because, you know, if you were just reading that just as a script as opposed to the webcomic, I think the weakness in the first two acts would really hinder you selling that movie. It really would. But because I guess it was a popular enough webcomic, or because Dark Horse just, you know, develops things in that realm, it worked. It worked pretty good. So congrats to the makers of Polar and the webcomic creator. I believe the last name is Santos. And that's it for a screenwriter's take. I'm gonna go nurse my aching head. Thank you for tuning in. Joan thanks you. And we'll see you next time here at a screenwriter's take.